This applies to everyone, everywhere, every time. Thank you.
So the second quote. During the year of the child, I think parents should stop and think about the expectations they lay on their children. They mean well, but sometimes they cause pain. A friend of mine had a nervous breakdown because her mother pushes her to get good grades and she couldn't do it. So over the last 40 years or so, there has been increasing awareness about mental health, which is amazing. Especially, as I mentioned before, with the emergence of social media, this has been even more accessible to raise awareness and the importance of it. And also gives people a platform to voice their concerns. However, 40 years later, mental health is still an issue, and it hasn't been solved. It's not easy. And so referring to the quote, we can see that without real communication, and that can be between the parent and the child, there's the danger of pushing a child beyond their abilities. And when you do this, this can lead the child to feel worthless or even doubt their capabilities, just because they're being pushed beyond what they actually can do. So parents should emphasize effort, I believe, over the actual task or goal, because in the outcome, no matter how much effort you put in, that's what's going to matter at the end of the day. We must recognize that these expectations that our parents or society or the school has for us is great. It's not a bad thing. It's great to motivate us. However, we must also make sure and recognize that expectations also have the power to burden children if there's no communication between what they're expected to do and what they can do. So this can lead to some communication and, unfortunately, mental health issues in children.
Children are the force of the future. Give us a chance. Historically, children have rarely been given special protections. It wasn't until the very middle of the 19th century that the idea appeared in France to give children special protection, enabling the progressive development of minorities' rights. Today, children are technologically gifted. We are hungry for knowledge. We have boundless energy. We adapt quickly, and we are connected. We are the generation that gets it. As our planet's future guardians, and there are millions and millions of us, we continue to be underestimated, ignored, and in some cases abused. The world still denies our rights to equal opportunities and have a chance to flourish. We need to know these rights will take resources. We must focus on giving every child a chance to go to school and ensure their quality of education is constantly high. Listen to these young voices. Children have the power to think of new and innovative ways to solve problems. Children have the ability to look at things from different perspectives. Children should and must be included in all conversations regarding them. And just a note from my personal experiences, please make sure that all children with disabilities are accepted as equal members of society. Let's all work together to abolish all stereotypes about kids with physical and mental disabilities, once and for all. I leave you with this quote from Gordon Brown, United Nations Special Envoy for Global Education, also said it well. Give children a chance. Give children a voice. The future is theirs.
Another Sophia, Sophia Constantini, wrote a poem with the phrase, International Year of the Child. I got inspired by this poem and decided to write one of my own, which I will share with you, with the phrase, Children's Rights Now. C stands for children taking action. H stands for the help those children need. I stands for including children. L stands for the love and care children deserve. D stands for democracy and giving everyone a voice. R stands for children's rights, now. E stands for the right to an education. N stands for the voices needed to be heard. S stands for supporting everyone equally. R stands for the Convention on the Rights of the Child. I stands for the right to an identity. G stands for gratitude for what's being done. H stands for heroes like Landon Pearson who are making this possible. T stands for together we can create change. S stands for the right to safety. N stands for the necessity for action. O stands for open minds willing to accept change. W stands for we can do this. Children's rights now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for setting the tone for us. Thank you, really, that was great. So we'll turn to the other expert, beyond the children. So first of all, I would like to ask Monique Bégin, who is more than vital to the success of the IYC than she probably realizes. And who I am really privileged to say has become a lifelong friend, bonded over books. She's had a most distinguished career, as you, I think most of you would know, beginning the national level with the Royal Commission on the Status of Women, and then a politician of the first order, then an academic, and she was also here at Carleton, and an expert member of national and international commissions. There's so much to say, but I'd rather that she said something herself. Finally, an author, wrote along the book. The fact that it's called Ladies Upstairs, I think fits in with the earlier comments I was.
Should I explain?
Yes, you should explain.
I chose that title because it's the Prime Minister. I did not want to go into politics, but I kept repeating to women they had to go. Municipal, school board, provincial, federal, etc. Well, I was asked, the first time I burst laughing, when the Prime Minister's office, Pierre Trudeau, Marc Lalonde, who was his chief of staff at the time, asked me. A year later, he was smart enough, he didn't phone. I was at the time working at the CRTC. He asked me to go to the PMO, such a place. I had never been there in my life, and I thought it was to discuss the implementation of the report on the status of women. I took the copy, went upstairs, and I opened, and these are the ministers I see on television and don't know. And I gave 3 conditions. I think I needed a challenge. And I said 3, I didn't want to be the, comment on appelle, the alibi women of Quebec. You know what I mean? There was nobody, no woman had ever been elected to the House of Commons of Canada. So I said we had to be 3 women in safe ridings. We were told that in camera by some women, Pauline Jewett and Flora MacDonald, Flora had not been in the House yet. She was elected at the same time I was, etc. They never give a safe riding to women. We hadn't a clue of what it meant. We tried to understand, but we, the commissioners and myself, we didn't know what it meant. So I used that expression, 3 women in a safe riding, and some financial assistance, because I'd never been connected to business in any way, shape, or form. And that was before the law that contributes a percentage to the election of any member. And they said yes, and I had a third request, I forgot what it was. So anyway, so 3 women are elected, and Senator Keith Davey was in charge of doing the same on Trudeau's order, find women. For the rest of Canada, there was not a single woman in the Liberal caucus, by the way. There had been Judy LaMarche, but there was none since several years. So Keith David told the Prime Minister after that he was totally unable to find one good candidate in English Canada. Such were the times with certain men. And in Quebec, the 3 of us were elected, Jeanne Sauvé, Albany Morin, and myself. So on October 31st, 72, technically at 8:05 I was declared elected by the CBC, so I was the very first one. Anyway, it's the opening of Parliament, and it was the West Door, it was called, and that's where members rushed up the stairs because it's the House of Commons is right there. It was the very first meeting in the House of Commons. So there's Albany Morin from Quebec City, very nice woman, quite older than me, and the mass of guys of any party elected. And we rush up, and the commissioner at the door shouts, "Ladies, upstairs," wanting us to go to the galleries of the visitors. So we said, "But we are MPs, you know." He said, "Oh no, there's no women MPs." And he made us stop on the stair and went and asked somebody to check if it was true. That's my title. So,
Yes.
shall I say, I'm known for the Canada Health Act. Bon, alors, of course it was something special. I've been very lucky to have, for 7 years, reappointed 3 times Minister of Health and Welfare, which was the biggest at the time of, in terms of 25% of the budget of the government. But I discovered when I was reappointed after Joe Clark that my colleagues, men in cabinet around me, my friends, those who had become personal friends, came and offered me their sympathy because I had been reappointed there. And it was like, you know, to move on, you have to be in finance, technology, environment, things that, things with prestige. But me, I was thrilled to go back to my old department. So I'm known for the Canada Health Act, which passed in April '84. I left politics by choice at the end of Pierre Trudeau's mandate. But what I'm most proud of, somehow, is the child tax credit that I created, and if you see in the book, it's a military coup because I'm a new Minister of Health and Welfare. I checked with my researchers in the department. I had a wonderful team of planning and research. Who are the poorest of the poor in Canada? I knew the answer because of the Royal Commission on Women, where we had this similar recommendation. He said, kids, usually of mothers alone or poor, the kids. That's exactly what I saw, that they started working on a possibility we would keep the family allowances universal, because that was my other fight, which were defeated when we left, when the Liberals lost in '84. So I gave 10 more years to the family allowances. But the child tax credit was a brand new concept using the Ministry of Revenue to distribute according to all kids 18 and less would get at the time $200 a year. Move forward, it went through all sorts of changes against not benefiting those that it was meant for under different governments, And finally, today, when Justin Trudeau, his first announcement as new Prime Minister was to get back to the original child tax credit. It's now called something else, of course. It's called the voyons. I wrote it down because I was going to forget it. It's called the Canada Child Benefit, CCB. My $200 a year, which I refuse to have split in 12 months because I've been poor, and I know that that's 200 is what mothers could never have at once, at least way back. And I remember some opposition shouting in the discussion in the House of Commons, one guy from Manitoba, I still see him. He says, so Mr. Speaker, all the Indian women in my riding will just go south to North Dakota. I hope it's the right place. That was what he said. North Dakota, and they'll just drink beer with that money. Another guy shouted, $200, that's unacceptable. It has to be divided by month. And I said, no. He said, they'll buy a bicycle. I said, there's nothing better for the health of a kid. You know, it was that kind of, but so it was passed. The $200 a year is now, I don't know how many of you have kids up to 18. Well, I don't think you would be in Carleton if you had real poverty, but one never knows. And it's now between $5,500 and $6,500 a year per kid, non-taxable. It's back to non-taxable, indexed automatically, etc. So that's what I'm the most proud of. And that passed in December '78, literally a few weeks before, and that's not planned, a few weeks before I announced the commission on the International Commission on the Rights of the Child.
Thank you. Thank you, Monique. Here to think about, we wanted one good story, and that's a really good story.
But it's a good story because you've seen at the end of February that StatsCan, on its annual report for 2017, they are always kind of 2 years kind of behind, or a year and something behind. For the first time in the last 10 years, I couldn't find statistics from my time, but in the last 10 years, children's poverty in Canada, which was 17.1% of all children in Canada 10 years ago, with the recent Canada Child Benefit has been reduced to 9%. There's still work, but it's fantastic to see results.
Yeah, that's the positive story. We'll hang on to the negative one for later.
Yes. I speak too much, I'm sorry.
No, that was great. So the next person I'm going to ask is Judy Finley. Judy and I are old colleagues, and as some people here know, and she's now at the, she was the child advocate when I was the children's senator, so that's how we sort of work together. And she's now at the Faculty of Community Services at Ryerson Child, and an associate professor and graduate program director. She was the longest standing child and youth advocate, and worked for more than 3 decades in the areas of child welfare and children's mental health, and many other things, including a lot of work that she in particular, but me trailing along on Indigenous issues, the issues of Indigenous children. So Judy has strong feelings. Well, one of our recommendations at that time was for more child advocacy. So I asked Judy to talk about it.
Good. Is this on? Good. So I had the opportunity to read the 1979 report, and Landon asked me to think about one sort of good thing or advancement since that time, and also one thing I worry about. So the advancement for me from my own experience, and I'm speaking now as an academic, is really the advancement of children's rights and the understanding and the conception of children's rights, particularly as it relates to tertiary education like college and university education, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. Certainly right across Canada in the field of child and youth care practice, children's rights are foundational to all the work that we do. And with that, of course, there's no point in having children's rights if you're not training people around advocacy. So advocacy from the perspective of offering, making sure there is children's voice, there is children's participation, and there is a movement towards a sense of citizenship by young people. So that's embedded now in all academic curriculum, in all child and youth care practice across Canada. And there's 3 pillars that we build on when we're talking about children's rights. And those 3 pillars are youth centering. So we always embed youth centering in everything that we do, anti-oppressive practice, and trauma-informed practice. And all that I've just talked about were things that were mentioned and were major recommendations in the 1979 report. The thing I worry about, and you all know me, so you know I worry about it, is child welfare and kids in child welfare and their lived experience. And I'm working presently on what's called the Crossover Youth Project. And we know through this project, which is across Ontario, but we've recently been looking at the data out of Toronto, we know that over half the kids in youth justice are from or in the child welfare system, which is quite appalling when you think about it. But what we didn't know is how they got there. And now we do have an understanding. We kind of thought we knew, but now we know. And how kids get there, it's not like you think. They don't come into child welfare because of trauma or abuse. Their first entry into child welfare is through parent-child conflict. So the majority of kids that are crossover youth come into the system through parent-child conflict. The early intervention is not successful, so there's more and more intrusive involvement, intrusive interventions, to the point where the young people are removed from their family home and placed in residential care or group care. And the majority of these young people were charged in group care, and in fact, this was their first charge. Their very first charge, and that moved them into the youth justice system. So they come into the care system to find themselves in the youth justice system. So that trajectory, we now have data, we now understand, we have clarity around that particular trajectory. We know as well that the earlier that kids enter the child welfare system, the deeper they will penetrate the youth justice system. So again, in the report of 1979, it said very clearly that early intervention with parents and children are really, really critical. And so what we've learned now is in fact, that is the case. Thank you.
So Lisa Wolf, who is also a long-standing colleague of mine, but UNICEF itself Canada was very involved in the International Year of the Child on the Commission, particularly involved along with the Red Cross in a program called Why Should We Care? And which was a program at school education aimed at helping students understand the importance of international development. So it was an outward focused program. But UNICEF was also instrumental in getting actually the commission off the ground and so on and so forth. And UNICEF has, of course, gone on to continue, and we've continued to work together ever since. So it's a good story and a concern.
Okay, so, and thank you for this opportunity, Landon, to look back 40 years when I was just a girl and oblivious to the commission and what you were working on, although Harry Black, our executive director at the time, was my first boss and a great man, and had the privilege of working with you, one of the few men in the work. And, in looking at the recommendations of the report, well, I was struck by lots of things, how foresightful the commissioners were in recognizing the rights of children even before the convention. But even looking at the many recommendations, and I looked at them and went, wow, we didn't have things like that back then. We didn't have a vaccination card where, parents would record vaccinations. It's really remarkable, everything that's been achieved over that 40-year span. It recalled to me a little anecdote. There's a television show some of you may have seen called Seinfeld, and there's this misanthropic character, George, who said, if I condense everything in my life I've done well down to one day, it looks pretty good. but you deserve much more credit for 40 years of a real, impact and legacy. And I think what the commission did went beyond your mandate at the time, the other 167 commissions around the world. Yeah. And you actually created an agenda rather than just, advocacy for children. So there is that legacy. But I guess I have been working in advocacy for about 15 years. So my sight lines are a little shorter, and I worry that things have become more difficult in some ways, to make gains for children and to have the optimism and the boldness that you did then. It must have been a very special time to do what you did. We haven't done anything quite like that since, and it feels really difficult now to even contemplate that. So that worries me. I think, though, for me, what we've been working on at UNICEF is good governance for children, the general measures of the convention, trying to encourage governments at all levels to do business differently for children. It's not just about what they're investing in and the programs and services and the pieces of legislation. It's how they think differently and make decisions about children. In the Commission's report, you envisioned a commissioner for children or a focal point. And then, of course, we've had advocates like Judy grow up across Canada, mechanisms for good governance. One of the, I think, successes that I've been involved in and with friends like Kathy and the Coalition is embedding child rights impact assessment and things that felt like a real moonshot and difficult to do. So just one example was working with the Child Advocate in New Brunswick and the government, which not long ago, just a few years ago, adopted across government child impact assessment, child rights impact assessment as part of their routine policy making. So all memoranda to cabinet that go up have to have looked at the potential impacts on children and their rights. And I guess children tend to follow women, as the Commission followed the Commission on Women, and we have gender-based assessment, but we would like to see child rights impact assessment, again, as a routine part of considering potential impacts of government decisions. So I think that felt like a real moonshot, and we had New Brunswick as a good example for the rest, in our great federal lab. As a demonstrator, it's been hard work to move that outward, but there are steps, so I think that's encouraging that we can still do these things for children. As a concern, I would say it's really, again, remarkable when I looked at the topics that the Commission was addressing, maybe in different complexions back 40 years ago. You were talking about the environment. You were talking about free play, things that really concern people now. None of those issues have totally gone away. Some of them have improved in some ways, but they've changed, yeah? I think one thing that was not on the radar of the Commission, only because it's become a problem really for the last 15 years, is widening income inequality. And Canada has, the income inequality, I don't just mean the bottom end poverty, I mean the top to bottom. That has widened in Canada more than most other wealthy countries in 15 years, and it's having a fallout, a very toxic impact on children. And it's not always recognized because it's not seen as a children's issue, it's seen as a broader economic problem. Well, it is a children's issue. It's, what we're seeing in our data, because we can also look at other countries that are more or less income equal than Canada. And where countries are more unequal, they're much more stressful relationships, and you see this. Families are anxious. They're worried about their kids falling backward down the income scale, and kids have just as great a chance now of falling backward as of getting ahead. That creates a lot of the pressure that we heard from the young people today, pressure to succeed. overscheduled kids. And, you know, it's a bigger problem than confined to just a few vulnerable groups. Countries that have more income inequality have more violence. And again, it's a relationship, health and stress, you know, toxic stress fallout. They have poorer health. So if we need,